Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name is Tim Braund. I'm the engagement manager for the Dynamic Dunescapes project, and we'd love to welcome you to this first event in a series of events over the next 14 days leading up to World Sand Dunes Day on the 25th of June. So do keep an eye on the website for other activities online and in the field that will be taking place. What I'd like to do this afternoon is just introduce you to the project, a little bit about the background, what are some of the issues and some of the things that we're going to be doing to address the issues that have been identified. So the project itself it's a large project. It's got £10 million funding, the majority of that coming from the Heritage Fund and from the European Union LIFE programme. I think it's important to stress that we're a biodiversity project. So the works that we're looking to undertake are to improve and enhance biodiversity in dune systems. Our key partners, Natural England are the lead organisation, they're the lead body, they're the responsible organisation, but we're also working with Plant Life, the National Trust in Dorset and North Devon, colleagues in Wales through Natural Resources Wales, and the Wildlife Trusts. And the key trusts we're working with are Cumbria Wildlife Trust, Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust and Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Just to show you where we're working, this slide of England and Wales, so the majority of the sites we're working on are on the west coast. So this is colleagues down in Cornwall. This is in North Devon, where we're working with a private landowner in partnership with Plant Life and the National Trust. South Wales, North Wales, and then a cluster up in the northwest. And over on the other side of the country, we're working with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. And some of the interest is that we have a very different sort of dune on the east coast. They tend to be smaller and not as wide because the prevailing winds don't lead themselves to what we might anticipate large dune systems to look like. Then down on the south coast in Dorset, it's one of very famous sites in Studland, which has got some particularly rare habitats and coastal heathland. So that's where we're working, 34 individual sites and over about 7,000 hectares. So why are we working in sand dunes? Well, every 5 to 6 years, surveys are done of all the major habitats across Europe. In the most recent survey, sand dunes were identified as the habitat and environment that was most at risk from losing biodiversity. And that's an interesting observation in itself, and it's possibly something we don't really think about that much, are sand dunes in and of themselves. We're very familiar with woodlands and meadows and the coast, but actually the dune systems are sometimes forgotten as the bit in between. So there are only 20,000 hectares remaining in England and Wales, massive reductions in Wales since the 1900s. But these sites are really, really important for some very rare and threatened plants and animals. And you'll begin to see a bit later on why it's specifically these rare plants and animals that are at risk, because they need more open and moving bare sand. And that's something that is the major management issue that we're trying to address through the project. So the main problem is what we've identified is that the dunes are becoming over-stabilised. And actually what a naturally evolving and naturally dynamic system needs to have a variety of habitats and a variety of different species for them to be healthy. So the dunes, and we'll see some images later that will sort of help explain what that looks like, are basically being fixed bit by bit, either through rank vegetation, so very coarse grasses and invasive scrub. And what's happening is that as those more rank vegetation and the scrub are taking over dominance, it's reducing the amount of bare and moving sand, therefore marginalising these very special plants and animals that need bare and moving sand for the systems to be dynamic and moving. So historically, the management regime for dunes was about fixing dunes, stabilising them. But from a biodiversity point of view, the management regimes need to change, and it's been identified that there are certain fairly fundamental things that need to happen to allow more dynamism, more moving sand, more bare sand within sand dune systems. Just an example of dune stabilization from a site in South Wales. So we've got a picture here on the left from 1947. All the light coloured area there is bare sand. So that's just post-war. A significant amount, probably 2/3, if not 3/4 of the sand dune system is actually bare sand. By the early 2000s, you can see here, if we ignore that block up there for a moment, the majority of the dune system has become vegetated. It's becoming overstabilized. And this actually was an area where plant life were working with Natural Resources Wales to do some of the experimental work that's led to the Dynamic Dunescapes project about opening up sand areas and getting more movement within sand dune systems. Another example is Byron Burrows, just down the road from where I live. One of the biggest sand dune systems in the country. We see here 1958. Again, there's quite a lot of bare sand within the dune system. By 2020, pretty much dominated by vegetation. There are a few areas along the foredune here that are a little bit more mobile, but nothing in the hinterland. And if you can just see where that V is for a second, just at the top of the picture, just hold that in your mind. That's what that was pointing at. And this is a natural dune blowout, what we call a blowout, where the vegetation in some way or another has been removed, and it allows the prevailing winds, so on the North Devon coast, so southwesterly winds, to blow into the system. And you can see here that the sand is beginning to move, and that's about a 30 to 40 metre natural movement of sand through the system. These are the sorts of things that we're trying to replicate through practical management interventions. So just to get our minds into how a naturally dynamic dune system, what that looks like, there are some key ingredients. It's a bit like making a cake. Obviously, we need to have sand, and we need to have a source of sand from a beach, and also out to sea is where a lot of the sediment gets blown in, and particularly if you can imagine in those particularly violent storms, it's where we get a lot of movement of sand in the water, and on particularly when there's a low tide, as a big area of beach exposed, and we get strong winds, that then dries and lifts the sand and starts to move it inland through the dune system. So wind is another really important part of the mix to get dynamism into a sand dune system. Water is important, and it's more to do with the groundwater rather than sea level water in terms of the dunes, and especially where we talk about dune slacks. These are areas that are predominantly wet in the winter, but tend to dry out in the summer. And there are a number of species, so some of the newt species and the natterjack toad in particular, need to have areas that are wet so that they can lay their eggs, but start to dry out towards the sort of the late summer, because that removes the possibility of predators in terms of fish being in those ponds that would eat the eggs and the toadlets and newtlets. So it's what we need. It's a water table that just is able to breach through the sand level here to give us those damp, wet areas. And the final element, it obviously, is plants, and that's running through from the areas at the embryo dunes on the strand line, the bit that we call mobile, where you get lots of pioneer species that start to stabilize the dunes. They get caught, the sand gets caught around bits of debris, and it allows some of these very specialist species to colonize. We're probably most familiar with marram grass, which is the grass that grows on the top of some of the really high dunes and has amazing root systems that bind the sand together. This is where we see most of the dynamism in our dune systems. Then as we move inland, things start to get a bit more fixed, slightly different mosaic of habitats and species in here, until eventually you will get through in a natural succession in that direction through to heath, scrub and woodland. Now we have an interesting dynamic where this area, the semi-fixed and fixed grassland, also tends to move towards the sea, But as the sand blows through a system naturally, it would cover this area, and the dunes naturally would move inland, left to their own devices, if there's no intervention from over the hundreds of years. So a natural dune system would be moving inland, but in storm events, then the sand gets pulled back out to sea, and so the whole thing happens again. So the threats and the issues that have been identified through the surveys is there is an increase in invasive native and alien species. So I think a lot of us will be aware of invasives like buckthorn. Well, that's native on the East Coast, which is interesting, but in most cases, buckthorn's an invasive species. Rosa rugosa, which is a lovely looking plant, but actually it tends to overtake and dominate native species. And then there are all sorts of garden escapes that have either come from collections or from garden dumping. They're beginning to take over and fix and stabilize the dunes. Where things are being more stabilized, it allows scrub and the rank vegetation to take hold. So again, less and less bare sand. When you factor in nitrogen depositions, that's from air pollution, whether that's from industry, whether it's from the emissions from vehicles, wherever that may be coming from, where there's a fixed dune system, it tends to favor plants that prefer nitrogen, so nitrogen-loving species. So things like ragwort, things like nettles, things like thistles, again, they tend to grow better and faster and outcompete the wild plants that are these pioneer species that enable this incredible diversity of habitats. So all of this is leading to stabilization and reduction in the amount of bare sand. And the actual sand dune habitat is therefore shrinking. So we're getting less and less. And we're also finding that we've got less connectivity between different dune systems and a loss of habitat within the systems that exist. So we need to have a mosaic of some bare sand, some short dune grassland, some areas of slack, a bit of scrub. So where there's a mixture, that's where things are most healthy. Oh, sorry. So the sort of things that we're going to be doing is actually trying to reintroduce dynamism into these systems. So these are the practical actions that the project is going to be undertaking. And I think it's really important to understand and to share with you that it isn't people randomly going around undertaking something practical. Everything is based on good science, it's based on evidence, it's based on surveys, and not every intervention will be appropriate for every location. So depending on what we're trying to achieve and where we want to undertake those works, there will be good science that underpins that. So a lot of thought goes into these, the works that we'll be doing, and making sure that the benefits will be for the benefit for biodiversity, but there won't be any unintended consequences of the works that we'll be doing. So the sorts of work that we'll be doing, and I'll show some slides in just a moment, creating more areas of bare sand, removing invasive species, restoring dune slacks, introducing grazing species. So ponies, cattle and sheep are really good for conservation grazing. They all graze at different heights, so they give us different heights in the sward for meadows, and we're looking to do rabbit reintroductions on some sites. Their burrows are really useful and they graze really tight to the ground. Removing some of the rank vegetation and scrub, and some of the possibly more controversial areas around creating notches, which are actually making big cuts into the foredunes near the beach to allow wind and sand to come into the system. A critical part of the Dynamic Dunescapes project is that it's working at scale. So we're not looking at small areas, we're looking at significant areas of work, and we're talking of not a wheelbarrow and a spade, but actually fairly heavy machinery coming in. And this is an example of some turf stripping in South Walney in Cumbria, where the top sort of 4 to 5, 6 inches are being stripped off the top of this rankish vegetation to expose the bare sand. And as the wind gets into that, that will move the sand around. It's also likely that there will be seed banks in there for meadow species that will grow up during the spring and summer, and then the associated insects and birds that will feed on that. But also by removing this top layer, it's removing a lot of the nutrients and a lot of the humus, the more organic matter that tends to accumulate when things are overstabilized. Sand dunes in a healthy system need areas that are very poor in nutrients to allow certain species to thrive. This is an example of in Ainsdale up in the northwest on the Sefton coast. If you can just see here, it's like a mown area. This is where a notch is going to be put in. You can see the scale of the works that will be undertaken there. There's someone stood in the bottom of the notch. And a few things to look at here. If you look then inland, running back for maybe 2.5–3 kilometers, there is almost a complete cover of vegetation. There is no bare sand, no moving sand in that site at all here. And what we intend to do is cut through this part of the foredune, so it's well away from any roads, from any car parks, from any houses, so there's no infrastructure in behind that, and allow the dynamic systems of the wind and sound being blown through the system to try and get more dynamism in behind. The scale of the project means that this requires planning permission. So it's actually seen as an engineering operation. That in itself brings some interesting challenges in working with the local planning authorities to understand what that looks like and what we want to achieve. This is down in Studland on the south coast, removing vegetation. Again, it's using machinery to pull out scrub and pull it up by the roots. Where there's good sand underneath, those scrub species will be quite easily pulled out of the ground. And ideally, we'll take those off site so that we don't let them mulch down and reintroduce any organic matter and nutrients into the site. So again, we're trying to get more bare sand, more moving sand within the system. Just going to have a quick look at Oxswitch now, where some work was done the turn of the year this year, and show you how, again, working at scale, but also using a combination of different techniques, hopefully will provide what we're trying to achieve. So this is down on the Gower. This is the foredune at Oxswitch before the works were undertaken. That's looking along the length of the spine of the dune system on the foredune. This is looking from the beach, looking inland. This is the notch that was cut in on this side. So again, looking along the line of the dune, see again quite a significant excavation. That's looking from the beach inland. Again, you can see the notch there. The notches will have been chosen dependent on the prevailing wind conditions. Where do we think the best wind is going to drive sand into the system? And this is what's happening on the other side of the dune. So this is Preworks. So that's the foredune again. See here, there's the notch. There's the notch that was cut in. There is a bit of a slack there, but the majority of the site you can see is quite heavily vegetated, beginning to get invasives coming in. So in this instance, there's quite a lot of reprofiling and turf stripping done to introduce more water. So these are classic dune slacks to give more of an opportunity for rare species to thrive. So this is just another quick view. You can see, so there's the foredune. There's a little track there. There's a little bit of a mini blowout going on there. Those are replicated there. Those are the works that we've undertaken to reintroduce dynamism. And we'll be monitoring what the impact that is through our citizen science programs and through national vegetation classification surveys on a regular basis. So from a practical point of view, what the project is looking to deliver is 7,000 hectares of habitat restoration. So bringing things back from not being in favourable condition to being in favourable condition. And 35%, so over a third of that total, we're looking to bring into favourable condition as identified by Natural England and Natural Resources Wales. We're looking to do works that will benefit 35 dune species, particularly plants, and then the plants would then support the animals that go with that and the whole food chain and the food web that goes with it. But also what we're looking to do is develop training and understanding of the new knowledge for land managers and landowners. Because historically, it's all been about stabilization. Up until the early 90s, it was all about stabilizing dunes and stopping them moving. We're very good at that. We know how to stop sand moving, but what we're trying to do is allow dune systems and land sand to move. We know how to stop it, so if things are not going quite as planned, there are tools and techniques for that to happen. The bit of the project that I'm responsible for is the engagement program. So as you've seen, we're actually moving into a series of quite large scale activities, and activities that are relatively innovative and relatively new in the received wisdom about how do we manage our sand dune systems. So we want them to move, we don't want them to be stable. So the engagement program is linked into the practical works. Again, we're looking to reduce biodiversity loss, and biodiversity is really important. It's in the news all the time now about how important biodiversity is. We've got some really important sites that are looking to increase biodiversity within them. The engagement program will be looking to encourage and support understanding of these new interventions. So things are different. Communities will have been used to seeing, on the whole, their dunes as they are today. It's unlikely that they will have seen much change in the last 30, 40 years. But when we start breaking out some of those old photographs, some people go, oh, I didn't realise that dunes used to be more open. I didn't realise that there used to be more moving sand. So if we can get people on board and working with us, there's more chance that we can make a success of these activities and make a success of conservation work, and also get people involved in environmental activity, in conservation volunteering, in monitoring, wherever it may be. We also need to work with site owners and site managers. Again, the received wisdom still within the geography curriculum is stabilization, putting up chestnut paling fences, stopping sand moving. There is a role for that, but what we're developing is a set of activities and management that allows for movement within dune systems. We need for site managers and site owners to understand that, and also for young people coming through to see that there is another way. And we also want people to enjoy the dunes. There's something like 270 million visits a year are made to the coast. And the surveys that we did, it was quite clear that people, understandably, were scampering through the dunes to get to the beach to set up for the day. So this is what I described at the beginning. The dunes are sometimes this bit in between, the bit between the car park, the bit between the road and the beach. We want to slow people's journey down through the sand dunes. See, actually, there are lots of things to enjoy. There are lots of activities you can undertake. They are amazing spaces in their own right, and they're probably a bit of a Cinderella in the conservation world when compared to woodlands, which are very obvious, coastal cliffs, which are very obvious, the upland, moorlands and mountains, which are very obvious. These sites are all part of that national biodiversity and diversity in habitat types. So the projects that we're looking to work with on the engagement side to ensure that more and more people are involved. First one is volunteering, and we're looking to develop opportunities that are moving beyond the traditional concept of volunteering, which may be around going out in the winter, cutting down scrub and burning it, getting potatoes out. Really important, it's really part of what we want to do, but also is to offer up different opportunities. A lot of people these days are time poor, but they want to do something. So there's something called micro volunteering, where you may only have an hour and a half a week, or you've only got a morning that you can get involved with. So how can we give those opportunities? Visiteering is a nice phrase that's come through the National Trust, where quite often when people are on holiday and they're on holiday week, they do sometimes want to give something back. How can we involve people in looking after these special places whilst they're on holiday? Again, one of the key things we need to do is training for volunteers, because we're talking about new techniques, and a lot of the work that we want to do, as we'll see in a little bit later, is around citizen science, community science, helping us monitor the impact of the work that we're doing. In the development phase of the project back in 2017, 2018, the communities that live in and around sand dune systems, we looked at the demographic, and it showed that actually there was a higher proportion of older people living in these areas, and that led to a project that we're working, a sub-program that we're working around, working with older people, including those living with dementia and their carers. How can we help local people, particularly local older people, access, engage and get involved with their sites? And we think through doing this sort of work, if we get it right for people, for older people, we're likely to get it right for a whole range of other people as well. So we're looking at access audits, we're looking at activities that are dementia friendly. And what's really important to the project is what we call co-design and co-curation, where we don't do unto people, but we work with groups and communities to say, okay, what is it that's stopping you enjoying this place, and how can we work with you to break down those barriers? Because these are the people that know best, rather than us as environmentalists saying, we think we've got the answer. Let's actually talk to people that are using, and also the people that aren't using these sites for their enjoyment, for health and well-being, for recreation, for relaxation. The other end of that scale was youth involvement. There are a lot of young people that live in and around dune systems, and there are limited opportunities and activities for them to get involved with things. So we've got a range of tastes today to say, hey, you've got this amazing system, this amazing place on your doorstep. How can you get involved? How would you like to be involved? What would you like to do to start taking care of and understanding these places? Taking a step up from there into sort of the 16 to 30s, we've got a range of training and bursaries available for what we're calling new generation conservationists. Because at some point in the future, we will need people to carry on managing these sites. People like me who've been around for a while will be moving on, and we need to have a career progression and understanding of the new ways that sand dunes can be managed, what's involved. So by giving training bursaries and training support to young people, whether they be graduates or they're coming out of FE college, it gives them an opportunity and pathways into the environmental world of work. And by getting those first-hand in the field experiences, working alongside established site managers, that's one of the best ways to get experience, to give them a good kickstart into their careers. We're also running training courses and networking existing site managers, because everybody's got something to share. Everyone's got something to learn. Every day is a learning day. And what we want to also encourage is that anything that we learn, we share with others. And that includes the bad stuff. That includes the stuff that doesn't work. I think it's really important to learn from our mistakes and be able to share those mistakes and share that learning in a safe way, so that we can then develop our knowledge as we go forward. I mentioned earlier, citizen science and local community science is really, really important. We want people to have a deep and long-lasting relationship with their sand dune systems. So we've got a dynamic Dunescapes app, which we use for collecting data in the field. So working alongside site managers, volunteers have been trained up how to use the app and how to monitor these interventions. You saw at the outset, we're spending £10 million on this project. We want to ensure that there is value for money and there's return on investment in those funds. So we need to monitor, has the intervention worked? If it hasn't worked, what do we need to change? So local people being involved in that program is really, really important to us. And also working with and through schools, colleges, universities and field study centres. Again, these are young people that are coming out, they are looking for field-based experiences. We can help with that and supply a range of resources, just to say there's another thing that you can look at, something else that you can study, something else that you can learn with. So that's really a quick scamper through what the project's about. So we're looking at fairly large-scale conservation interventions to increase the amount of bare and moving sand within sand dune systems. We want to work with communities, we want to work with land managers, we want to work with landowners to understand those interventions, and we want to work with people and train them up with new skills to help us monitor what's happening in the dunes, what's not happening in the dunes, do we need to adjust anything? So that's the project, hopefully in a bit of a nutshell. It's a bit of a scamper through, but I'm really, really happy for us to have a discussion, a bit of a Q&A. If you've got anything that comes up latterly, my contact details are there. Please feel free to throw them through. So I'll leave that slide up for a minute and I'll hand back to Emma. So hopefully that was of some interest.
Thanks so much, Tim. That was a brilliant overview of what we're doing. You can stop sharing your screen now if you want, or you can leave it up to you. So we've had two questions just pop in the chat. So let me read those out and see if we can answer those. And anyone else, if you've got any more questions, do continue to pop those in. So first up from Elizabeth, we've got, what was the name and date of the EU survey? So right at the beginning, you talked about the survey that listed sand dunes as one of the most threatened habitats in the UK, in Europe, actually. Can you remember when that was?
I'm pretty sure, I think I can remember the date. I think it's 2013, which sounds like a long time ago, but they're done on quite long time scales. I can't remember the citation of the actual surveys, but if I'm sure we could dig that out if that would help. But it is, so all the habitats across Europe, so they're woodlands, marshlands, dunes, montane, whatever it is, they're surveyed regularly and then comparisons are made. And this was the, oh my goodness, sand dunes at the top of the list for biodiversity loss. So it is based on real science and not just me saying, oh, quite like a job doing some engagement work. I think biodiversity is being lost in Dunescapes.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, the LIFE programme, which fund us in part, have funded heaps of other amazing sand dune restoration projects all across Europe. We've got other ones in Wales and there's loads in kind of Spain and France and all sorts. So yeah, no problem. So what we'll do then is we'll dig that out for you, and I'll pop an email around to everyone who's attended later with a link to this talk once I've popped it on YouTube, and I'll include answers to that as well. So Tim, the other question we've got is, when you were talking about Lincolnshire's dunes, you mentioned that they were different and they were narrower. So does that mean that actually the techniques that we're using in Lincolnshire are different in some ways to the rest of the other ones we're using around England and Wales?
I think primarily the difference is that, as far as I'm aware, there won't be any of the big notching going on. If you look at the West Coast dunes, so when we looked at Byron Burrows and we looked at Kenfig and Sefton, there were those classic Western coast, fairly steep-sided dunes where the notches going in. On the East Coast, they tend to be lower. I think that's just the only way I can put it. They're not as high. But we will be using things like vegetation clearance, we'll be doing scrub clearance, we'll be putting in new scrapes. And what's interesting on the East Coast is a lot of the dunes then run into marshland, and there's another habitat in behind that. So there's this whole complex going through. And the team up in Lincolnshire, I think over this winter have cleared something like 4 hectares of clematis, I think, something like that. And again, clematis, we think, oh, this is a lovely thing. It absolutely dominates and takes over in a natural situation. So the team cleared that out, and what we did find is underneath where they cleared out, there were some old scrapes, there were some old dune slacks there. So it was actually moving things forward and saying, actually, this again is restoration. Things are there already. We just need to do a bit of management on that. And sorry, I should say, and it's a prevailing wind. If you imagine, if you live in the southwest, we'll have a gale, we have a full-on gale, and it happens all through the winter. On the east coast, it's coming off the North Sea, a bit windy. I'm going to be cheeky now, a bit windy, but not quite the same, and not for quite as long.
We'll just take your word for it there, Tim. So brilliant, thank you. We've also got a question: when is the project from and to? And Caroline is interested in how we're going to be developing the citizen science side of things.
Okay, so the project runs until 2023, but there is a monitoring period after that, goes on for at least 5 years, out to 2028. So the project will have been running for 10 years. See, my postman just putting left it through the door. So the actual lifetime of the project, in terms of from conception through to ultimate monitoring, is a 10-year period. But the engagement element is over a 3-year period, just to get people involved. So the second question was about citizen science.
Yes, how we're developing citizen science as part of the project.
So what we've got, if you pop onto the website, you'll see that we've got a citizen science app there. It's not an app in the traditional sense of the word, where you might have come across apps for identification where you sort of point and click and it tells you stuff. It's more of a data entry system. So it's taking all the ways that you would do a survey on paper. So if you imagine going out into the field and looking at a quadrat, and you've got your clipboard and you're taking notes, what have you, it's doing that electronically, and that feeds back into a database that the site managers have access to, and are then able to interrogate that data to see what changes are taking place. So what we're trying to encourage, and I mentioned about this deeper relationship with sites, is to train volunteers and communities to have a longer relationship. So by being involved in citizen science, they will be able to go out year on year on year, hopefully, and keep that monitoring going, say, did this really have an effect? So that's what we're doing in terms of developing the citizen science aspect. We've got, I've got 7 colleagues around the country on the engagement side. They're rolling out training over the next few weeks for people that are interested. If you're interested in getting involved, if you know where and looking at the map of your local dune system is, I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear from you. Through the website, you can go through the I'd like to volunteer page, and we'll make sure that your contacts are pushed out to the right people if you want to be involved.
Brilliant. I've got a really interesting question next up from David, saying that often in a lot of areas around dunes, some of the communities are deprived in different ways. So what are we doing in terms of engagement for reaching out and connecting with people? So perhaps people who are out of work, or people who are young, or who may not educationally achieve as well. So you said, are there engagement plans for them? And I think we've got some really exciting answers to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the glorious things about the project is, although we identified particular audiences, we're not constrained by that. So if there were communities of interest or communities of geography that want to get involved, please just contact us, and we'll see how we can work with you. And I want to stress again, it wouldn't be us doing to that group. It'd be saying, what are the barriers that you face in accessing these places? What can we do, working with you, working with site managers, working with conservation organisations, to make things easier and more enjoyable? And for example, it's been a trying year for everyone, but we launched our engagement work just as the first national lockdown came in. And it was like, okay, we can't actually get out and meet people now. How are we going to change the way that we worked a bit? And one of the aspects that we had some fantastic scratch and sniff postcards that smelled like suntan oil. So what we did is actually we contacted some of the local care homes and care networks, and sent those off and got people to write back to us or contact us with, what does this remind you of? And we've had some lovely stories from care homes where the residents have gone, this takes me back to when I was a child, this takes me back to holidays, wherever it may be. And a lot of that work was developed on working with groups. So I wouldn't be as arrogant to say, well, we're going to do this with this group or that group. If there's interest out there and we can help, please contact us. It may be that we can't, but we can then signpost people on to more appropriate organisations, or it could be that there are sites that are already doing those things. And if they are, talk to us, because we'd love to share that learning within the project network.
Absolutely. And I think also, just building on your point there, one thing that I was reminded of when I read that question is, you mentioned working with young people and young people out of work. We're also producing lots of bursary programs, aren't we? So particularly in South Wales, we've got an amazing bursary program where we're able to help young people gain training and other opportunities that they might not otherwise have to get involved in either practical conservation and skill management, or even media and communication side of things. So I think we are doing some really exciting things. Like you said, we've got a brilliant team of 7 really fantastic engagement officers who are delivering a really exciting program in all of their local communities. So thanks for that question. That was a great one. We've also got, so coming in from Gareth, do any of your techniques involve introducing more sand into a dune system? This is a good question.
So is that more sand as in physically sort of I'm gathering sand up and moving it in, or just trying to allow natural processes? So I would say what we're doing is the latter. So we are looking to particularly I suppose there are 2 areas where some of the controversy is. One is around notches. There's a understandably having seen those big frontal dunes, those 4 dunes be like they are for 40, 50 years, for someone to come along with a digger, put in a big V, that's quite a dramatic impact on that location. But what we're trying to do there is just replicate what would have happened naturally, historically, where there'd be a break in the 4 dune. I think as if the wind is blowing at more than 4 meters per second, that then lifts sand from the beach. So at low tide particularly, that then drives the sand up the beach. And it's a lovely phrase I hadn't heard of until this project, but sand rain. And I'm sure we've all been out walking in the winter where your dog's eyes are going, goodness me, all this sand in my face. And it's, if you're wearing flip-flops, it's sort of taking your ankles off. But that sand gets driven inland into the system behind it. So that's what I would describe as introducing more sand, but it's in a natural process. As far as I'm aware, there's no intention to actually go and dig a load of sand out from somewhere, dredge it out, put it in a trailer and dump it inland. That's because that's not a natural process. The other bit of the other area is blowouts. So within a sand dune system, so behind the 4 dune, when you've got inland a bit further, like the image I showed at Byron Burrows, you can get blowouts where all the sand is there. It's covered in thick vegetation, but in some places, almost like peeling back the top of a tin, it reveals the sand and allows the sand to then move within the system. So it's moving the sand around, not necessarily introducing sand per se. So those are the two techniques that we're looking to get more moving sand and more bare sand. And there's some really interesting conversations around what we call recreation for recreation. So historically, you've probably all been told, stick to the path, don't go off the path in dunes, you wear them away. Well, to a certain extent, that's sort of true. But in certain areas, if the right areas are identified again through survey and where the site can take it, that disturbance by grazers, rabbits, or humans is absolutely fine because it exposes bare sand. And where there's bare sand, we get these really rare plants and animals. And there's is it the earth tongue fungus? I think it is. It's Studland. I'm learning bit by bit. The earth tongue fungus is really prevalent alongside the main routes that people walk in the Studland dune system. So if people weren't walking there, that habitat would get lost and we'd lose that really rare fungus. So in some places, we want to encourage people to explore. So if you do see a sheep track, I think it's fine. Keep an eye on local notices, keep an eye on local advice, but don't necessarily feel that I cannot go off the beaten path. Well, the other key, I got thrown a key message, that's part of my job. But dogs in dunes, obvious conflict. It's not just in dunes, it's anywhere in the countryside. But at the same time, if you keep an eye out for local signage, there will be alternatives as to where you can go. Because we all want the opportunity to go and enjoy these special places. And particularly locally, probably almost, yes, maybe 50, 60% of users are going to be local dog walkers. And I'm a local dog walker myself, but it's just being responsible. We've got a fantastic program called Pause for Thought, a way that you can get involved and see what you can do as a dog owner to help look after dune systems.
Fantastic. Okay, so another question from David. He's made a point about being with autistic kids and disabilities. Are there any plans around engagement for those with disabilities and increasing their access to the dunes?
But the short answer is not for those specific groups, but I would suggest that the brief work I've done in the past working with people with autism, living with autism, is the dunes could be quite a good place because they are remarkably peaceful. Even on a bank holiday Sunday, on a sunny day, the minute you get away from the car park, the minute you get away from the main beach, there are these incredible areas of an oasis of calm where you can just take time to enjoy. We've got some, on the website, there's some activity packs and there's a John Muir pack that you can use for doing activities. So I would say this could be a good place. Again, I'll go back to, if you've got a specific group that you'd like us to consider working with, give us a call and we'll see what we can do. And there may be ways that we can work with you to make sure that at least we understand what your needs are and then can share that amongst the network. Say, have you considered this? Because I go back to, if we get it right for one set of people, it's likely that we'll get it right for other people as well. So hopefully that's a straight answer, but also an offer at the same time.
Brilliant, thank you. And on your note, when you said, yes, they are oases of calm, David actually said, yes, that's why I love them. I can't help but agree myself. So, okay, well, I'll move on to our final question then before we wrap up. A great one to end on. Baglan Dunes by Port Talbot, a site that you and I have both visited as part of the project, is quite small since the housing and the old industrial stuff has been put in around it. So although it's a small site, Melanie has asked, is it still big enough to be important?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. No site is too small or too insignificant. There is no such thing as an insignificant site, basically. And actually, we're doing some fairly concentrated work at Baglan. I don't know whether you're involved or aware or not, but working with our colleagues at NRW and Swansea University and David Kilner, who's our our engagement officer in South Wales. There's already quite a lot of work that's been done on clearing some scrub there, if I recall correctly, so opening up the dune slack. We're looking to involve the community more and more in, again, it's monitoring work. There's a lovely tension in Baglan about, I think, off-road motorcycles. And The activity itself, I can see, is a bit of a challenge and might seem to be in conflict. I think from a user perspective, absolutely. But I've seen a lovely aerial photograph of Baglan, and you've got these lovely, sweepy, snaky lines of bare sand running through the dunes, which is sort of what we're trying to achieve in some ways. And the Baglan site's really important, and particularly because it butts right onto a community, and it's somewhere that people can access easily and enjoy and help look after. So yeah, no site is ever too small, no such thing as an insignificant site. The more that we can enhance and improve it, the better life is for everybody.